Welcome to the hotline for today, Monday, the 8th July 2024. Thank you so much for joining us. We know you have choices. We're happy when you come here, happier when you find reasons to stay. I'm sitting in today for Clive Mullings, my colleague, and we'll do so tomorrow as well on the hotline. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for staying when you come here. This is the hotline.
Emily's views, her position on the issues, her point of view backed up by the facts. Here are Emily's views.
On the front page of the Gleaner this morning, Professor Michael Taylor is hoping that the onslaught of Hurricane Beryl is a wake-up call for the unbelievers in climate change. He hopes they'll realize that the concept is indeed real. According to Ainsworth Morris of the Gleaner, for over a decade, Professor Taylor has sounded the warning about the wrath future storms could bring on the island, and more so the Caribbean, if the world does not adapt the necessary measures that have been suggested to slow climate change. We have been talking about this for a long time, but part of the reason I raise this is because front and center now are questions, and rightly so, about what is available to Jamaica in the recovery effort post-Beryl in light of the catastrophe bond that we have in place. And the catastrophe bond, as you may recall, has been dubbed, certainly Jamaica being the first in this region to have such a bond. Immediately after the hurricane last Thursday, when I came here, I reached out to Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark to get a sense as to what exactly is the trigger for a payout under the catastrophe bond. He has, since that time, certainly last week, I got a voice note from Dr. Clark, and I think he has since caused to be published this information on what triggers a payout under the catastrophe bond. But more importantly, if we've not reached the trigger for a payout under this particular bond, what else is available? And the what else is important because, as the professor has told us, we are expecting things to continue and to get worse, especially concerning natural disasters. So there appears to be the tendency, firstly, for us to say, if we can't get a payout under the CAT bond, the catastrophe bond, then what is the point of it? Yeah? And all policies that are available, they have particular trigger points. Some of them, the trigger points are lower than others, but it doesn't mean that one shouldn't have an insurance policy that has a very high trigger point, because especially when you're getting older and you know it's only a matter of time that some of those things can kick in. Yeah, it may be costing a lot, it seems, up front to pay the premium, but the moment you do not have the policy, that is exactly when you need it. So this is what Dr. Nigel Clark sent out last week on what is available to Jamaica.
We are very fortunate that Hurricane Beryl did not make landfall in Jamaica, as the trajectory of the center of Hurricane Beryl passed 45 miles approximately south of Kingston and continued just off Jamaica's south coast. Though there was significant damage in sections of the island, In many other parts of Jamaica, including much of Kingston, the akis and mangoes remain on the trees. The government of Jamaica has strategically put in place a multi-layered set of financial instruments to pre-finance the emergency response and recovery costs of natural disasters. While it is neither expected nor designed that all storms will trigger all instruments, the idea is that we should always be able to access resources from some instruments for every storm. As such, the extent of the damage, as preliminarily and anecdotally assessed, will certainly mean that the government of Jamaica will have to draw on all of the resources available in the first two layers, our contingency fund and the natural disaster fund. This totals $4.5 billion. It's still early days, but we may also have to access the next layer, which consists of our contingent credit claim with the IDB. As such, on Thursday, I initiated the process for this access. While the maximum amount under this layer for the most severe natural disasters is approximately $46 billion, it will take a few days to ascertain exactly how much of this Beryl will trigger, as well as how much we will need.
So, we hear from Dr. Clark, we should have access to a contingency fund and a natural disaster fund, both of which can total about $4.5 billion. We also hear him say that there is a potential contingency credit claim with the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, and that can be up to $46 billion. But we do not yet know where we stand with this particular claim and what the discussions over the weekend, what has materialized out of them. Those discussions he said he'd initiate. So what we intend to do this morning, especially because we are now realizing how devastating the impact has been in some parishes. I speak of St. Elizabeth, parts of which are still without electricity and water. Parts of Clarendon, I heard the Prime Minister in his tour, particularly of Southeast Clarendon, saying that that constituency sits for the most part below sea level. So it is easily impacted by weather events, particularly rain, let alone the rain we had and with the force of wind we had. So 4.5 billion within the context of whatever is to be assessed, it may be a drop in the bucket. And more than anything else, we need to understand how is it that these sums, when they are received, how are they to be allocated? A lot of people have to start literally from scratch. How is it to be shared? Is it that some people will just have a stipend to help with building back roofs, and others will get maybe something to help with, I don't know, putting back up some retaining wall depending on the level of danger one is in? We do not know. Yeah, a lot of assessments have to be done, but I think we need to understand what are the principles behind the sharing of the money when the money actually comes. I cannot imagine that it will be a complete build back for every single person or even a near build back. Yeah, but we need to understand from now exactly how things are to be done. So what we understand is that the catastrophe risk bond itself, that we're not going to get any drawdown on. And I think the minister went on to speak some more about that. So let me just hear him a little bit more on that.
We have a tropical cyclone and excess rainfall policies with the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility. We will know by end of business on Friday on the possible payouts from the tropical cyclone policy, but we have to wait until early next week to receive feedback regarding the excess rainfall policy. With respect to the top layer in our disaster risk framework, the path and intensity of Hurricane Beryl did not trigger Jamaica's catastrophe bond, which essentially serves the purpose of providing financial protection against a Category 5 or very intense Category 4 hurricane making landfall in Jamaica. Had Hurricane Beryl made landfall in Jamaica, or had Hurricane Beryl retained its intensity as observed on Tuesday, as measured by centralized air pressure, it would have certainly triggered the catastrophe bond. In addition to the above, the government of Jamaica has a $140 billion precautionary and liquidity line with the International Monetary Fund. The PLL is intended for countries with strong fundamentals and can be drawn in event of liquidity problems that emerge. While it is too early to rule anything out, we do not anticipate that Hurricane Beryl has led to or will lead to liquidity issues for the government of Jamaica. At the current time, therefore, this facility is therefore unlikely to be drawn. Over the next few days, the government of Jamaica will aggregate the estimates of damage and interventions required and finalize the total resources available from disaster risk financing sources. We have learned from past experiences. What differentiates this time from previous similar occasions is that this time, the government of Jamaica has been proactive in arranging disaster risk financing in advance.
That's Dr. Nigel Clark, the finance minister. So, had Hurricane Beryl made landfall in Jamaica, or if it had retained its intensity, as was forecast on Tuesday, and that intensity they measure it by what they call centralized air pressure, then it would have triggered the catastrophe bond. So it seems now, if we don't get a very intense Category 4 storm or a Category 5 that makes landfall, then that Tier 1 payout under the catastrophe bond we will not have access to. And I want to understand from the minister what informs this particularly high threshold for the catastrophe bond. I believe perhaps what happened with Gilbert, if we had the fund then, perhaps we could get a drawdown. But I need to understand, is it the prediction of the ferocity of the natural disasters we're likely to have, why this is pitched at such a high level for that particular payout? And is the thinking that the other disaster funds available to us, such as the contingency fund, the National Disaster Fund, and we're hearing about a tropical cyclone policy, as well as the excess rainfall, is it because these sort of lower level ones can be available to us, why we've pitched the CAT bond at such a high level? Yeah, we need to get that information, and all the updates that the minister said he had over the weekend, based on his commitment to engaging with individuals. I'd certainly love to understand the outcome, and as such, he's to join me right after my views in this segment. Yeah.